I'm Susan, 29. My family just forgot my birthday for the third year running. 3 decades on this planet, and apparently I'm less memorable than their dentist appointments. But here's the thing about being invisible your whole life. It teaches you to watch, to plan, and to strike when no one sees it coming. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely overlooked by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me paint you a picture of my wonderful family. There's Mom, who remembers every detail of my brother Jake's college soccer stats from 15 years ago, but can't recall what I do for a living. Dad, who built his accounting firm from nothing and somehow convinced himself that makes him Warren Buffett. And Jake, golden boy extraordinaire, who at 32 still lives in their basement playing video games and calling it finding himself. I work at Sterling Investments as a financial analyst. Not glamorous, but I'm good with numbers. Always have been. While Jake was getting participation trophies, I was calculating compound interest for fun. Yeah, I was that kid. Sue me. This morning started like any other. I checked my phone hoping for birthday messages. 0. Well, technically 3 automated ones from my bank, dentist, and that pizza place I ordered from once in 2019. Even Domino's cares more about my existence than my own blood relatives. I drove to work through Seattle traffic, listening to some morning show hosts banter about birthday traditions. One mentioned how his grandmother still sends him $20 bills and cards covered with embarrassing stickers. Must be nice to have family members who acknowledge your birth date without needing calendar reminders. The office was typical Tuesday chaos. My desk sits in the middle of the floor, surrounded by the constant hum of Bloomberg terminals and coffee-fueled conversations about market volatility. My colleagues are fine. We exchange pleasantries about weekend plans and complain about client deadlines. But they're not close friends. Just work acquaintances who probably wouldn't notice if I disappeared for a week. Around lunchtime, I finally broke down and texted my mom. Hey, any dinner plans tonight? Subtle, right? The response came 3 hours later. Busy tonight, sweetie? Rain check? That's when I realized something had shifted inside me. For years, I'd made excuses for them. They're busy, they're distracted, they just don't think about birthdays. But sitting at my desk, watching other people get flowers delivered and leave early for celebration dinners, something crystallized. I opened my banking app and stared at the number that had been growing steadily for 5 years. $53,000. Not life-changing money, but substantial for someone who'd been living like a monk. No fancy vacations, no designer clothes, no expensive hobbies. Just steady saving and smart investments. Then I opened my work email and saw the bonus notification. Our team had exceeded targets, and my personal contribution had been significant. $15,000 minus taxes. Combined with my savings and available credit, I was looking at real purchasing power. A crazy idea started forming. What if I stopped waiting for them to remember I exist? What if I made myself impossible to ignore? I spent the afternoon researching real estate websites, specifically luxury beach properties. Oceanfront homes with million-dollar views and price tags to match. Places that scream success, permanence, and look what I did while you weren't paying attention. By closing time, I'd identified 3 possibilities. All required significant financial commitment, but I'd been pre-approved for more than I expected. Good credit, steady income, and a substantial down payment make lenders surprisingly friendly. The drive home felt different somehow. Instead of sulking about another forgotten birthday, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Tonight wasn't ending with sad takeout and Netflix self-pity. Tonight was the beginning of something much bigger. But first, I had a phone call to make. I called the real estate agent at 8 p.m., which probably broke some unwritten rule about business hours, desperate times, and all that. "This is Rebecca Martinez with Coastal Properties," came the crisp, professional voice. "Hi, Rebecca. I'm calling about the oceanfront listing in Cannon Beach, the one for $1.2 million. A pause. "Oh, wonderful. Are you looking to schedule a viewing? I have availability this weekend. Actually, I'd like to see it tomorrow morning. Early, if possible." Another pause. People don't usually make impulsive decisions about million-dollar properties on Tuesday evenings, but Rebecca was a professional. "Certainly. How does 9 a.m. work?" "Perfect." I hung up and immediately called my boss. "David, it's Susan. I need to take a personal day tomorrow." He grumbled something about quarterly reports but approved it. The benefit of being reliably present is that occasional absence doesn't raise flags. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night researching mortgage rates, property taxes, homeowners insurance, and HOA fees. The financial analyst in me needed every detail mapped out before making any commitments. By 3 a.m., I had a complete spreadsheet breaking down monthly costs, equity projections, and long-term investment potential. The house would stretch my finances thin, but it was feasible. Aggressive, but feasible. At 7 a.m., I put on my best business suit, the navy one I save for important client meetings, and drove 2 hours to the Oregon coast. The morning fog was just lifting as I pulled into Cannon Beach, revealing the dramatic coastline that makes this area legendary. Rebecca met me at the property entrance. Professional woman in her 50s, perfectly styled blonde hair, and the kind of smile that sells expensive things to people who can't quite afford them. "Susan, I'm Rebecca. Ready to see your dream home?" The house was stunning. 3,000 square feet of contemporary architecture perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. Floor-to-ceiling windows in every room, a gourmet kitchen with granite countertops, and a master suite with a private balcony facing the ocean. The previous owners were tech executives from Portland, Rebecca explained as we toured. They only used it weekends and summers. It's essentially brand new. I walked through each room methodically, keeping my expression neutral while mentally calculating furniture costs and utility bills. The house was perfect, almost suspiciously so, like it was waiting for someone exactly like me to discover it. "What's the timeline for closing?" I asked casually. "Well, that depends on financing and inspections. Usually 6 to 8 weeks for cash transactions, longer if you need mortgage approval." "I'm pre-approved," I said, pulling out the letter from my bank. "What about cash offers?" Rebecca's eyebrows rose slightly. "Cash offers move much faster, 2 to 3 weeks if inspections go smoothly." I stood on the deck, looking out at the endless ocean, and made the decision that would change everything. "I'll take it." Rebecca actually laughed. "I'm sorry, what?" "The house, I want to buy it. Full asking price, cash offer." Her professional composure cracked slightly. "Ms. Henderson, this is a very significant purchase. Perhaps you'd like to discuss it with family, think it over for a few days." "Family. Right. The people who couldn't remember my birthday." "No need," I said firmly. "When can we write up the paperwork?" 2 hours later, I was driving back to Seattle with a signed purchase agreement in my passenger seat. 15% earnest money had been transferred from my savings account. The remaining balance would come from liquidating investments and a substantial mortgage. I felt terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. At 29, I'd just committed to buying a house worth more than most people earn in 20 years. A house with monthly payments that would require careful budgeting and zero financial mistakes. But as I drove past the familiar suburban landscape where my family lived their predictable lives, one thought dominated: they were about to learn I existed in the most spectacular way possible. The only question now was timing. The closing process was surprisingly smooth when you have excellent credit and liquid assets. 3 weeks later, I was signing final paperwork at a title company in Portland, officially becoming the owner of a luxury oceanfront home. My phone buzzed constantly during the signing. Work emails, mostly, but also a text from Jake. "Mom wants to know if you're free for dinner Sunday. She's making that chicken thing you like." I almost laughed. Now they wanted family dinner. After 3 years of forgotten birthdays and casual dismissal, they suddenly remembered I existed. The timing was poetic. "Everything looks perfect," the title agent said, sliding the final documents across the mahogany conference table. "Congratulations on your new home, Ms. Henderson." Walking out with house keys felt surreal. I drove straight to the property, letting myself in like I'd done it 1,000 times before. My house, my ocean view, my sanctuary that existed completely independent of family drama. I spent the afternoon taking photos, not the casual iPhone snapshots people post randomly, but carefully composed shots highlighting the dramatic architecture, pristine interiors, and breathtaking ocean views. The kind of photos that make people stop scrolling and stare. That evening, I crafted the most important social media post of my life. Single photo of the living room at sunset, golden light streaming through those massive windows, ocean stretching to the horizon. Caption: birthday gift from myself. Posted to Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Then I turned off my phone and opened a bottle of champagne I'd bought for the occasion. The silence was beautiful. No notifications, no family obligations, no disappointed expectations. Just me, my house, and the rhythmic sound of waves below. My phone stayed off for 18 hours. When I finally powered it up the next morning, the notification count was staggering. 73 missed calls, 212 text messages, countless social media comments. Mom had called 16 times, Dad 12, Jake 8. Extended family members I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had my number and urgent need to reconnect. The text messages were a masterclass in family psychology. Mom: "Susan, call me immediately." Dad: "What is this house? Call now." Jake: "Dude, WTF, call home." Aunt Linda: "Honey, we need to talk about this purchase." Cousin Michael: Susan, this is Michael. Please call when you get this. But my personal favorite came from my grandmother. Beautiful home, sweetheart. About time you did something for yourself. Even Grandma got it. I made coffee and sat on my deck, reading through messages while watching surfers tackle the morning waves. Each increasingly frantic text revealed how thoroughly I'd disrupted their comfortable assumption that little Susan would always be waiting patiently for their attention. The irony was delicious. For years, they'd treated me like background noise in their lives. Now, I was the only thing they could think about. Have you ever experienced a moment when people who ignored you suddenly needed your attention? Drop a comment about how you handled it. Around noon, I decided to answer one call. Jake's number appeared on the screen. Susan, finally! What the hell is going on? Good morning to you too, Jake. Mom's been calling everyone trying to figure out how you bought a house like that. Dad thinks you won the lottery. Aunt Linda thinks you're involved with some rich guy. Everyone's going crazy. I sipped my coffee, watching a fishing boat navigate the swells. Crazy about what exactly? The house, Susan. That's like $1 million house. Where did you... Are you okay? I'm perfectly fine, just enjoying my coffee with an ocean view. Silence. Then, you actually bought it, you're really living there. I really am. But how? And there it was. The question that revealed everything about how they saw me. Not congratulations, not excitement for my success, but confusion about how their invisible little sister could possibly afford something impressive. Hard work, Jake. Saving money instead of spending it on video games. Novel concept. Susan, you need to call Mom. She's worried sick. Worried about what? I don't know, everything. This is so unlike you. Unlike me. According to someone who'd barely noticed me for the past decade. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think. But the real conversation was still coming. Sunday family dinner arrived with all the warmth of a tax audit. I drove to my parents' house in my usual Honda Civic. No need to upgrade cars yet, that would be overkill. And knocked on the door like a visiting stranger. Mom answered immediately, like she'd been stationed by the window. Susan! Oh, honey, come in, we have so much to discuss. The dining room table was set with the good china. The china that usually appeared only for Thanksgiving and when Dad's business partners came over. Apparently, I'd achieved guest of honor status through real estate acquisition. This is quite a surprise, Dad said, carving the roast with surgical precision. We had no idea you were in the market for property. No idea. 3 decades of living with them, and they had no idea I might have ambitions beyond their peripheral vision. I wasn't really looking, I said, accepting the plate Mom handed me with trembling hands. But opportunities present themselves. Jake shifted uncomfortably. How did you even find that place? It's not like you've been house hunting. Actually, I've been researching investment properties for months. This one checked all the boxes. Mom set down her fork with audible concern. Investment property? Susan, that's not a rental. That's a home. A very expensive home. $2.2 million, Dad added, consulting what appeared to be a printed Zillow report. According to public records, they'd been researching me. How flattering. Actually, I paid 1.2, I corrected. Cash offer, quick closing. The silence that followed was spectacular. You could practically hear their mental calculators smoking. Cash? Mom's voice cracked slightly. Cash. Dad cleared his throat. Susan, where exactly did you get that kind of money? And there we had it. The real question hiding behind all the concern and surprise. Not, how wonderful for you, or, we're so proud, but where did you get money we didn't know about? From working, I said simply. Saving, investing wisely, managing my finances like a responsible adult. But that's over $1 million, Jake protested. You make what, $60,000 a year? 60,000. He'd underestimated by 40%, which perfectly illustrated how much attention they paid to my actual life. I make more than you think, and I spend less than you assume. Mom reached across the table, patting my hand with maternal concern that felt 20 years too late. Honey, we're just worried. This is such a big decision to make alone, without family input. Family input. From the people who forgot my birthday 3 years running. When was the last time anyone asked for my input on their major decisions? I asked mildly. Dad frowned. That's different, Susan. We have experience with financial matters. Do you? Because from where I sit, Jake's been unemployed for 6 months while I've been building wealth. But please, tell me more about financial experience. Jake's face flushed. I'm between opportunities, and I'm exploring entrepreneurial ventures. Living in Mom and Dad's basement while playing Call of Duty isn't entrepreneurship, Jake. Susan, Mom gasped. That's uncalled for. Is it? Because I've been watching this family operate for 29 years, and I'm starting to notice some interesting patterns. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Dad's jaw tightened, Mom's face went pale, and Jake looked like he wanted to disappear into his mashed potatoes. "What patterns?" Dad asked carefully. I smiled sweetly, taking a bite of perfectly prepared roast beef. "Oh, don't worry about it. I'm sure it's nothing important." But I could see it in their eyes, the dawning realization that their dismissive little daughter had been paying much closer attention than they'd ever imagined. The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable small talk, but the dynamic had shifted permanently. For the first time in my life, I held cards they wanted to see, and I was just getting started. The week following family dinner was enlightening. Suddenly my phone rang constantly, not just immediate family, but extended relatives who'd been essentially strangers for years. "Susan, darling, it's Aunt Carol. I was just thinking we should get together for lunch. Catch up on your exciting new life." Aunt Carol, who'd skipped my college graduation because she had a yoga retreat. "Susan, honey, this is Cousin Jennifer. Mom told me about your beautiful new home. I'd love to see pictures." Cousin Jennifer, who'd unfriended me on social media after I missed her wedding. I was in finals week and she knew it. The pattern was transparent. Money talks, and apparently mine had found its voice. My work life improved dramatically too. Word travels fast in financial circles, and owning oceanfront property sends specific signals about professional success. My boss David started including me in client meetings that were previously above my pay grade. "Susan has excellent instincts for investment opportunities," he told the Hoffman Group during Thursday's presentation. "She clearly understands market timing." If only he knew how accurate that assessment was. Friday evening, I drove to my beach house for the first weekend as an official resident. The 2-hour drive from Seattle felt like traveling between different worlds. Corporate analyst Susan with her budget concerns and family obligations, and beach house Susan who owned something magnificent. I'd ordered minimal furniture online: a bed, couch, dining table, basic appliances. Nothing fancy yet, but enough to make the space livable. The house was gorgeous empty, but it needed warmth to become home. Saturday morning brought unexpected visitors. "Susan, are you there?" Mom's voice called from the front door. I looked through the peephole to see both parents standing on my deck, looking appropriately impressed by the ocean view and contemporary architecture. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here?" "We wanted to see your new place," Dad said when I opened the door. "Bring a housewarming gift." The gift was a generic fruit basket from Costco. Thoughtful. "How did you get my address?" "Public records," Dad replied matter-of-factly. "Property ownership is public information." Of course it was. They'd researched me like a potential business investment. I gave them the tour, watching their expressions shift from skeptical concern to obvious envy. Every room brought new appreciation for exactly how far their supposedly struggling daughter had come. "The kitchen alone must have cost $50,000, Mom murmured, running her fingers along the granite countertops. "The view is certainly spectacular," Dad admitted, standing on the deck overlooking endless Pacific blue. We sat in the sparsely furnished living room, afternoon sunlight streaming through those massive windows. For several minutes, nobody spoke, just waves crashing below and the awkward silence of a family recalibrating their assumptions. "Susan," Mom finally said, "we owe you an apology." I waited. "We've been distracted, focused on Jake's struggles instead of recognizing your achievements." "Distracted for 3 years?" Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Your birthday. We should have remembered. Should have, but didn't. We're remembering now," Mom said hopefully. "We want to be part of your life, your success." There it was. Now that I had something impressive, they wanted inclusion. "That's interesting timing," I observed. "What do you mean?" "I mean you've shown zero interest in my life until I bought something that got your attention. Now suddenly you want to be involved." They exchanged uncomfortable glances. "It's not about the house," Mom protested weakly. "Isn't it? Because if I lived in a studio apartment and worked at Starbucks, would you be here right now?" The silence answered my question. I stood up, walking to the window overlooking my private stretch of beach. "I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not pretending this is about renewed family affection either. Susan, you're here because you're curious, because you want to understand how I manage this without your knowledge or approval, because suddenly I'm interesting." Dad cleared his throat. "We've always found you interesting." I turned back to face them, and for the first time in my life, I was completely honest with my parents. "No, you haven't. But you're about to." 3 weeks into beach house ownership, I'd developed a comfortable routine. Drive down Friday evenings, spend weekends furnishing and decorating, return to Seattle Sunday nights for the work week. It was expensive maintaining 2 residences, but the mortgage payments were manageable with careful budgeting. More importantly, the psychological transformation was remarkable. Having a space that belonged entirely to me, where family drama couldn't intrude, gave me perspective I'd never experienced. For the first time, I could see my relationships clearly instead of desperately trying to fix them. The family attention continued intensifying. Jake started texting regularly, asking about investment strategies and building wealth. Mom called twice weekly with transparent excuses to check on my well-being. Dad began forwarding financial articles with subject lines like, "Thought you'd find this interesting." I responded politely but kept conversations superficial. They were performing interest in my life, not expressing genuine curiosity about who I'd become. Wednesday brought an unexpected development. Rebecca Martinez called with an unusual request. "Susan, I have something unusual to discuss. Are you available to talk?" "Of course." "What's going on?" "I've been contacted by someone interested in purchasing your property. Sight unseen, cash offer, significantly above market value." I sat up straighter in my office chair. "How significantly?" $3.4 million. I nearly dropped my phone. A profit of over $2 million after 3 weeks of ownership. "Who's the buyer?" "Technology executive from California. He's relocating to Oregon and wants oceanfront property immediately. No inspections, no contingencies, can close within 10 days. The offer was life-changing money, enough to pay off the mortgage, purchase a smaller property outright, and bank millions for future investments. Financial independence in a single transaction. What would you recommend?" I asked. "Honestly, it's an extraordinary opportunity. Properties in that area appreciate steadily, but this kind of immediate profit is unusual. You could reinvest in multiple smaller properties and build a real estate portfolio." I thanked Rebecca and promised to consider the offer. But as I stared out my office window at Seattle's gray skyline, I realized the decision wasn't really about money. The house had given me something I'd never had. A dramatic demonstration of my capabilities. Proof that I could execute complex financial decisions independently and successfully. Evidence that my family's casual dismissal of my potential was completely unfounded. Taking the profit would be smart business, but it would also return me to relative anonymity, back to being Susan with the nice savings account, instead of Susan with the oceanfront estate. That evening I called Jake. "Hey, what's up?" he answered, sounding genuinely pleased to hear from me. "I wanted to run something by you. Get your perspective on a business decision." "Really? Yeah, absolutely. What's going on?" I explained the offer, the profit potential, the investment possibilities. Jake listened carefully, asking surprisingly thoughtful questions about tax implications and market timing. "So, what's the downside?" he finally asked. "Giving up the house, the location, the lifestyle, the status, I guess. Status matters to you?" It was an honest question, not judgmental. "I think it might," I admitted. For the first time in my life, I own something that commands respect. People take me seriously now. "Susan, people should have been taking you seriously before. The house is just making it obvious." It was the most insightful thing Jake had said to me in years. "You really think I should take the offer?" "I think you should do whatever makes you happiest." But $3.4 million buys a lot of different kinds of happiness. After hanging up, I sat on my couch considering options. Keep the house and the lifestyle it represented, or take life-changing money and build something even bigger. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Family barbecue this Saturday. Hope you can make it. Want to show off our successful daughter to the neighbors." Show off their successful daughter? Not celebrate my achievement or enjoy my company, but display me like a trophy they'd finally earned. I looked around my modest Seattle apartment, then pulled up photos of my beach house on my phone. The choice suddenly became clear. I called Rebecca back. "The offer stands?" "Absolutely. He's very motivated. Counter at $3.6 million. Cash, 10-day closing, but I keep all appliances and custom fixtures. I'll present it immediately." 20 minutes later, she called back. He accepted. "Congratulations, Susan. You just made the deal of a lifetime. Maybe." But as I began planning how to tell my family I'd just sold their bragging rights for a $2 million profit, I suspected the real deal was still coming. The closing happened faster than I'd expected. 10 days later, I was signing paperwork that transferred ownership of my dream house for an obscene profit. $3.6 million, minus closing costs and capital gains taxes, still left me with enough money to fundamentally change my life trajectory. But I wasn't ready to tell my family yet. Not until I had the next phase planned completely. The Saturday barbecue invitation provided perfect timing. I arrived at my parents' house with a bottle of expensive wine and watched Mom's face light up as she introduced me to the neighbors. "This is our daughter Susan. She just bought a beautiful oceanfront home in Oregon." Mrs. Patterson from next door looked appropriately impressed. "How wonderful! What a smart investment." "Susan's always been our financial genius," Dad chimed in, rewriting history with impressive creativity. I smiled and nodded, playing the role of dutiful daughter while internally cataloging every fiction they were spinning about their newfound pride in my achievements. The barbecue continued with more neighbor introductions, each featuring increasingly elaborate descriptions of my success. By the time we sat down to eat, I'd apparently been a real estate visionary and investment prodigy my entire life. Jake pulled me aside during dessert. This is weird, right? They're acting like they always supported your business decisions. Extremely weird, I agreed. But also instructive. What do you mean? I mean, I'm learning exactly how much their opinion of me depends on external validation from strangers. He frowned. That's pretty harsh. Is it? Because 3 weeks ago they were worried about my impulsive purchase. Tonight I'm a financial genius. The only thing that changed was other people's reactions. We stood watching our parents hold court with the neighbors, enthusiastically discussing my career trajectory and investment acumen. The performance was flawless, except for being completely fabricated. So what's your plan? Jake asked quietly. My plan? Come on, Susan, I've known you my whole life. You always have a plan. Smart boy. Apparently someone in the family had been paying attention. What makes you think I have a plan? Because you're too calm. If I made that kind of money in 3 weeks, I'd be telling everyone, you're just watching, like you're waiting for something. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and realized he'd developed more insight than I'd given him credit for. Maybe living in our parents' basement had provided its own education in family dynamics. You want to know what I'm waiting for? Yeah, I'm waiting to see how far they'll go. How much of their previous dismissal they're willing to pretend never happened. And then I'll decide what kind of relationship we're going to have going forward. Jake was quiet for several minutes, processing this. You sold the house, didn't you? I stared at him. What makes you say that? Because you're too relaxed about people calling you a real estate genius. If you still owned it, you'd be worried about living up to their expectations. But you don't care what they think anymore. Definitely smarter than I'd realized. I sold it. I confirmed quietly. For how much? Enough, Susan. Enough to never worry about money again, Jake. Enough to make choices based on what I want, instead of what I can afford. His eyes widened as the implications sank in. Holy shit. Language, I said automatically, then laughed. Sorry, that sounded like Mom. What are you going to do now? I watched our parents continue their performance for the neighbors, spinning tales of their brilliant daughter's success. Mrs. Patterson was asking for investment advice, clearly assuming I was some kind of financial wizard. I'm going to give them exactly what they want, I said finally, which is a daughter they can be proud of. But Jake caught the edge in my voice. You're planning something. I'm planning everything. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments. I have a feeling you're going to be surprised by what comes next. Monday morning, I submitted my resignation letter to David. 2 weeks' notice, professional and courteous, with no explanation beyond pursuing other opportunities. His reaction was predictable panic. Susan, if this is about money, we can discuss a raise. Your recent performance has been exceptional. Recent performance. Funny how buying expensive real estate had suddenly improved my professional evaluation. It's not about money, David. I'm exploring different directions. Real estate development? Investment banking? Where are you going? I smiled mysteriously. I'll let you know when I figure it out. The truth was, I didn't need to figure anything out immediately. With careful investment of my house sale profits, I could live comfortably for decades without working, but that wasn't the point. The point was freedom to choose what came next based on passion rather than necessity. I spent my final 2 weeks systematically documenting my projects and training my replacement, professional to the end, even though walking away felt remarkably liberating. Meanwhile, I'd been researching something that would serve my long-term plans perfectly. Executive education programs, MBA programs for working professionals, advanced financial planning certifications, investment strategy courses from prestigious universities. If my family wanted a daughter they could be proud of, I'd give them someone so impressive they'd never again question my capabilities. I enrolled in a 6-month intensive MBA program at a respected Seattle business school. Classes 3 evenings per week, Saturday seminars, extensive project work. Expensive, but money was no longer a constraint. The day before my last day at Sterling Investments, Mom called with exciting news. Susan, honey, the Hendersons want to meet you. Who are the Hendersons? They live in that big colonial on Maple Street. Very successful people. He owns 3 car dealerships. She's a lawyer. They heard about your real estate success and want investment advice. Investment advice. From someone they'd never shown interest in before I bought expensive property. That's flattering, but I'm not really qualified to give investment advice. Don't be modest. You've obviously got natural talent for financial matters. Natural talent she'd never noticed during 29 years of close proximity. Actually, Mom, I have some news. I'm going back to school. School? For what? MBA program. Advanced Business Strategy, Corporate Finance, Investment Management. Silence. Then, oh, well, how long will that take? 6 months for the intensive program? Then probably additional certifications. Will you still have time for family dinners? There it was. Her primary concern wasn't my educational goals or career development, but whether my schedule would accommodate their newfound desire for my company. I'll make time for what's important, I said carefully. Of course family is important, Susan. Is it? Because it's taken you 3 years to notice I exist. Another silence. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me before I bought the house? Well, we've been busy and you seem so independent. Independent. Right. Susan, I don't understand why you're being so difficult lately. Difficult. The universal accusation used by people who don't like being held accountable for their behavior. I'm not being difficult, Mom. I'm being honest. About what? About the fact that your sudden interest in my life corresponds directly to external validation of my success. You care about me now because other people are impressed. That's not true. Prove it. How? Tell me something about my life from before I bought the house. My interests, my goals, my concerns. Anything that shows you paid attention when I wasn't worth bragging about. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. You work in finance. You're very responsible with money. That's it? You like books? Books. The generic answer people give when they have no idea what someone actually reads. What books, Mom? I don't. Fiction? I'm not sure. 29 years and she wasn't sure whether I read fiction, but she could recite every detail of Jake's failed entrepreneurial ventures and social media presence. I have to go, I said gently. Class starts soon. Susan, wait. I'll talk to you later. Mom. I hung up and sat in my car outside the business school, watching other students hurry toward evening classes. Most looked older than me, professionals upgrading their qualifications for career advancement. But I wasn't here for career advancement. I was here for something much more personal, becoming someone so undeniably successful that my family would have no choice but to take me seriously. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was investing time and money to earn respect I should have received unconditionally. But if that's what it took, I was prepared to exceed every expectation they'd never bothered to have. 6 weeks into the MBA program, I discovered something unexpected. I was genuinely good at this. Not just competent, but exceptional. My finance background gave me advantages in quantitative courses, while years of observing family dynamics had sharpened my understanding of organizational behavior and leadership psychology. Professor Williams pulled me aside after Thursday's strategic management seminar. Susan, your case study analysis was outstanding. Have you considered pursuing a consulting career? Actually, I'm exploring different options. Well, consider this an unofficial recommendation. McKinsey recruits heavily from our program, and you'd be an ideal candidate. McKinsey, the name that opens doors and commands respect in business circles. The kind of company that would make my family's casual bragging about my success look embarrassingly amateur. I started researching management consulting seriously. The work was demanding. 60-hour weeks, constant travel, high-pressure client situations. But the prestige was undeniable, and the exit opportunities were extraordinary. McKinsey alumni became CEOs, founded companies, managed billion-dollar investment funds. More importantly, no one questioned the intelligence or capabilities of McKinsey consultants. I began preparing for their recruiting process, which was notoriously rigorous. Case study interviews, analytical reasoning tests, cultural fit assessments. The acceptance rate was lower than Harvard Medical School, but I had advantages most candidates lacked: extensive financial analysis experience, genuine passion for business strategy, and months of available time to prepare without employment pressure. The family dinners had continued, each one featuring new attempts to showcase my expertise to their social network. Last Sunday, they'd invited the entire book club to meet their investment advisor daughter. Susan knows all about the real estate market, Mom announced proudly. She made a fortune in just 3 weeks. The book club ladies looked appropriately impressed, asking questions about market timing and property selection that I answered carefully. No need to mention that my success had been largely luck and timing rather than sophisticated analysis. You should write a book, suggested Mrs. Chen. Real estate investing for beginners. Or start a consulting business, added Mrs. Rodriguez. People would pay good money for your insights. I smiled politely while internally noting how quickly everyone assumed my single successful transaction indicated comprehensive expertise. People want to believe in financial gurus, even when the evidence is limited. Dad had started forwarding me business articles with increasing frequency, usually accompanied by notes like, "Thought you'd find this interesting," or "Curious about your perspective on this trend." The articles were basic: Forbes listicles about market predictions and CNBC summaries of economic reports. Nothing I hadn't already read or wouldn't have encountered in my normal information consumption. But his assumption that I needed his curation revealed how little he understood my actual knowledge level. Jake, meanwhile, had begun asking more thoughtful questions during our occasional conversations. He'd started reading financial news and taking online investing courses, apparently inspired by my example. "I opened a Roth IRA," he told me proudly last Tuesday, "starting with small monthly contributions. But it's something." "That's smart, Jake. Starting early makes a huge difference." "Yeah, I wish I'd started sooner." But better late than never, right? It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging the years he'd spent dismissing my financial discipline as boring or obsessive. The MBA program was approaching its midpoint, and my consulting application was progressing through McKinsey's process. First-round interviews had gone well, and I'd been invited to the final case competition. If I received an offer, it would change everything. McKinsey consultants commanded respect that transcended family dynamics. No one questioned their intelligence, dismissed their achievements, or forgot their professional accomplishments. But more importantly, it would give me a platform to build something significant. Not just personal wealth, but expertise and influence that could create lasting impact. The night before my final interview, I sat in my apartment reviewing case studies and considering how far I'd traveled from the invisible daughter who'd been forgotten on her birthday 6 months earlier. Tomorrow would determine whether I'd continue that trajectory toward becoming someone impossible to overlook. But regardless of the outcome, I'd already learned the most important lesson. My family's opinion of me said more about them than it ever had about me. The question now was what I planned to do with that knowledge. I got the McKinsey offer. Not just an offer, a premium offer with signing bonus, relocation assistance, and assignment to their Seattle office's corporate strategy practice. The partner who called with the news mentioned they'd been exceptionally impressed with my analytical capabilities and unique perspective on complex business problems. I accepted immediately. The celebration dinner my parents insisted on hosting felt surreal. They'd invited extended family, close neighbors, and several of Dad's business associates. The dining room was decorated like I'd won a Nobel Prize rather than landed a job. "To Susan," Dad announced, raising his wine glass, "who's always been destined for great things." Always been destined. The man who'd expressed concern about my impulsive house purchase 3 months earlier was now claiming he'd predicted my professional success. Aunt Linda leaned across the table during the main course. "Susan, I always knew you were special. Even when you were little, you had this intensity about you. Intensity that had apparently been invisible to everyone until I started achieving things they could brag about." Uncle Mark asked detailed questions about McKinsey's client base and project types, clearly fishing for insider information he could use in his own consulting business. Mom kept steering conversation toward my brilliant investment strategies, despite my repeated explanations that I'd made one lucky real estate transaction. But Jake surprised me again. While everyone else performed enthusiasm about my achievement, he pulled me aside during dessert. "How are you feeling about all this?" he asked quietly. "All what?" "The job, the attention, the sudden family pride. It's a lot." I studied his face, looking for traces of resentment or jealousy. Instead, I saw genuine concern. "It's complicated," I admitted. "Yeah, I bet. 6 months ago, they barely remembered your birthday. Now you're the family success story. Does that bother you?" He considered the question seriously. "Honestly, it bothers me that it took this long for them to notice how capable you are. But I'm not surprised you're excelling. You've always been the smartest person in the room." "Jake, no, seriously. Even when we were kids, you understood things the rest of us missed. You just kept it to yourself. It was the most perceptive thing anyone in my family had ever said about me. Why didn't you say anything before?" "Because I was caught up in the same pattern everyone else was. Assuming you were fine, assuming you didn't need attention or support, assuming your competence meant you didn't have feelings." I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition that at least one family member was capable of honest self-reflection. "I'm sorry," he continued, "for not seeing you clearly, for not being a better brother, Jake. And I'm sorry about your birthday. All those birthdays, that was inexcusable." I felt tears threatening and forced them back. This wasn't the time or place for emotional breakthroughs. "Thank you," I said simply. "So what happens now? With the family, I mean." I looked around the dining room at my parents basking in reflected glory, my relatives networking for their own benefit, my father's associates treating me like a potential business connection. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want," I said finally. "Which is?" A daughter so successful they can't ignore her, dismiss her, or take her for granted. And then? Then I'll decide whether that's enough. Jake nodded slowly. Fair enough. But Susan? Yeah? Don't lose yourself trying to impress people who should have been impressed all along. The McKinsey orientation began the following Monday. 30 new consultants from prestigious MBA programs, each carefully selected for analytical ability and leadership potential. I was one of only 6 hired directly from intensive programs, rather than traditional 2-year MBAs. The work was exactly as demanding as advertised. 12-hour days, complex client problems, constant pressure to deliver innovative solutions. But I thrived in the environment, finding satisfaction in the intellectual challenges and professional respect. My first project involved analyzing market entry strategies for a Fortune 500 manufacturing company. 3 weeks of intensive research, financial modeling, and strategic recommendations. When I presented findings to the client's executive team, their response was immediate and enthusiastic. Outstanding analysis, the CEO told my project manager afterward. We'd like Susan involved in the implementation phase. Implementation phase. Extended client engagement, revenue recognition, all good things for a new consultant's career trajectory. But the real satisfaction came from something else entirely. Absolute confidence in my professional capabilities. No family dynamics, no personal history, no preconceptions about my potential. Just results and competence and respect, earned through performance. 6 months earlier, I'd been an invisible daughter whose birthday was consistently forgotten. Now I was a McKinsey consultant whose insights influenced major corporate decisions. The transformation felt almost too dramatic to be real. But as I prepared for the next client presentation, I realized this was just the beginning. 8 months into my McKinsey career, everything changed during what should have been a routine client meeting. I was presenting market analysis for a mid-sized technology firm when their CEO, David Chen, interrupted my presentation with an unexpected question. Ms. Henderson, how would you like to skip the consulting phase and come work for us directly? The room went silent. My project manager looked shocked. The client team exchanged glances, and I felt my career trajectory shift in real time. I'm sorry? I managed. Chief Strategy Officer position. We're expanding into new markets and need someone with your analytical capabilities and strategic thinking. The consulting recommendations are excellent, but we want the person who created them. CSO. At 29. For a company with $800 million in annual revenue. That's quite an offer. Could I have some time to consider? Of course. But Susan, may I call you Susan? Opportunities like this don't come along often. The drive back to the McKinsey office felt surreal. My project manager spent the entire trip discussing the implications of client job offers and how to handle them professionally. It's actually a good problem to have, he said. Shows your work is making an impact. But you need to consider the long-term implications carefully. That evening, I sat in my apartment researching David Chen's company, Quantum Dynamics. Solid financials, innovative products, aggressive growth plans. The CSO role would mean equity participation, executive-level decision-making, and responsibility for strategic direction. It would also mean leaving McKinsey after less than a year, which could be viewed as professionally disloyal. I called Jake for perspective. CSO of what size company? He asked when I explained the situation. 800 million revenue, about 3,000 employees. Susan, that's insane. In the best possible way. Is it too soon? I've only been at McKinsey 8 months. Who cares? If they want you badly enough to poach you from McKinsey, you must be doing something right. The family is going to lose their minds. The family is going to be insufferable, he corrected. Mom will probably start telling people she always knew you'd be a corporate executive. He was right. The thought of their retroactive pride was almost amusing. What would you do? I asked. I'd take the job, but I'm not you. What does your gut say? My gut said this was the culmination of everything I'd been building toward. Not just professional success, but the kind of undeniable achievement that would permanently alter how everyone saw me. I think I'm going to do it. Then do it. But Susan? Yeah? Remember what I said about not losing yourself trying to impress people. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with my McKinsey manager to discuss the opportunity professionally. The firm was supportive, client job offers were considered a mark of successful consulting, and agreed to facilitate a smooth transition. I called David Chen that afternoon and accepted the position. The family dinner announcing my new role was even more elaborate than the McKinsey celebration. Mom had invited everyone she could think of, including people I'd never met who apparently needed to hear about her extraordinarily successful daughter. Chief Strategy Officer, Dad repeated for the 4th time, savoring the title. Our Susan, a corporate executive at 29. Our Susan, the possessive pronoun that had been notably absent when I was struggling to get their attention. The evening reached peak absurdity when Mom started discussing my leadership qualities with complete strangers, describing characteristics she'd never acknowledged during my actual childhood. But something had shifted inside me during the months of professional success. The validation I'd once craved from them felt less important now. Their pride was pleasant, but no longer necessary. Jake noticed the change during a quiet moment on the deck. "You seem different," he observed. "How so?" "Less invested in their reactions, like you're watching a performance instead of participating in it." "Maybe I am. That's probably healthy." "Probably." We stood watching our parents hold court inside, enthusiastically describing my achievements to people who'd never heard my name before tonight. "Do you think they'll ever actually see you?" Jake asked. "The real you? Not just the successful version?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't think they're capable of that level of depth." "That's sad." "It used to be sad. Now it's just information." "What does that mean for your relationship with them?" I watched Mom gesture animatedly while describing my natural leadership abilities to a neighbor who looked increasingly overwhelmed by the conversation. "It means I'll give them the daughter they want to have," I said finally. "Successful, impressive, worth bragging about, but I'll keep the real me for people who can handle complexity." "People like who?" "People like you, when you're being honest." Jake smiled. "I can live with that." As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, I realized I'd reached a strange kind of peace with my family dynamics. They would always be who they were. People who equated worth with external achievement, who needed social validation to recognize value in their own children. But I was no longer who I'd been, the daughter desperate for their approval, willing to accept scraps of attention as evidence of love. Tomorrow I would start my new role as Chief Strategy Officer, continuing the trajectory that had transformed me from invisible to unavoidable. But the real transformation had been internal, learning that my worth wasn't determined by their recognition of it, and that realization was worth more than any job title. 2 years later, I stood in the executive conference room of Quantum Dynamics, presenting our acquisition strategy to the board of directors. The company had grown from $800 million to $1.2 billion in revenue under my strategic guidance, and we were positioned for international expansion. "Outstanding work, Susan," Board Chair Margaret Walsh said as I concluded the presentation. "Your leadership has been transformational." Transformational. It was a word that perfectly described the past 3 years of my life. After the meeting, I drove to my parents' house for Jake's engagement party. He'd met Sarah, a pediatric nurse, 6 months earlier, and their relationship had progressed with surprising maturity and depth. The backyard was decorated for celebration, filled with family and friends genuinely excited about Jake's happiness. For once, the gathering felt authentic rather than performative. "Susan," Mom greeted me with the excessive enthusiasm she'd adopted since my professional success. "Come meet Sarah's parents. They're so impressed that Jake's sister is a corporate executive." Even at Jake's engagement party, I was being deployed as a family credential. But something had changed in how I responded to these moments. Instead of feeling frustrated or invisible, I felt amused, like watching characters in a play perform their assigned roles. "Mom," I said gently, "this is Jake's night. Let's focus on him and Sarah." She looked momentarily confused by my redirection, then recovered with her practiced smile. "Of course, dear." I found Jake and Sarah by the dessert table, looking genuinely happy together. Sarah was warm and intelligent, with the kind of grounded confidence that suggested she saw Jake clearly, both his strengths and areas for growth. "Congratulations," I told them sincerely. "You look perfect together." "Thanks." "Susan, Sarah's been wanting to meet the famous sister." "Famous is a strong word," I laughed. "Are you kidding?" Sarah said. "Jake talks about you constantly, how proud he is of your success, how much you've taught him about perseverance and goal setting." I looked at Jake with surprise. "You talk about me?" "Of course I do. You're my sister, and you're remarkable. Even when I was invisible, you were never invisible to me. I just wasn't brave enough to say so when it mattered." It was an honest acknowledgement that meant more than any family bragging session. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, Dad pulled me aside for a conversation I'd been expecting for months. "Susan, I owe you an apology." "For what specifically?" "For not recognizing your potential earlier, for treating your achievements as surprising instead of inevitable." "Inevitable? You've always been exceptional. I just couldn't see past my own assumptions about what success looked like." It was the closest he'd ever come to admitting his bias had obscured his perception of me. "I appreciate that, Dad. I want you to know how proud I am. Not just of your career, but of who you've become." "Who have I become?" "Someone who doesn't need our approval anymore. Someone strong enough to succeed with or without our support." The observation was surprisingly perceptive. "Does that bother you?" "A little." he admitted honestly. But mostly it impresses me. Driving home that night, I reflected on the journey from forgotten daughter to corporate executive. The external transformation had been dramatic, from invisible to undeniable, from struggling for attention to commanding respect. But the internal change was more significant. I'd learned to derive validation from my own accomplishments rather than other people's recognition of them. I'd discovered that competence and confidence could coexist with compassion and humility. Most importantly, I'd realized that family relationships, like business strategies, required clear boundaries and realistic expectations to function effectively. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Thanks for being there tonight. Sarah loves you already." I smiled, typing back, "She's perfect for you. I'm so happy." "You seem happy too, like really happy, not just successful." He was right. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely content with who I was and what I'd built. Not perfect. I was still learning to balance professional demands with personal relationships, but authentic in ways I'd never experienced before. The house purchase that had started this transformation felt like a lifetime ago. That desperate attempt to force my family's attention had evolved into something much more valuable, self-respect that didn't depend on external validation. If there's one thing I'd share with anyone feeling invisible in their own family, it's this. Your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is build a life so fulfilling that their approval becomes optional rather than essential. I pulled into my driveway. I'd eventually bought a beautiful townhouse in Seattle's Queen Anne neighborhood and sat for a moment appreciating the journey. From forgotten birthday to corner office, from desperate daughter to confident executive, from seeking approval to offering it selectively. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at quantum dynamics, continued growth in responsibilities and influence, and ongoing navigation of family relationships that had been permanently altered by my transformation. But tonight, I was simply Susan, successful by any external measure, but more importantly, genuinely content with the person I'd chosen to become. And that realization was worth more than any house, any job title, or any amount of family recognition. Some transformations begin with dramatic gestures, but they're completed through the quiet daily choice to value yourself exactly as much as you deserve. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your strength when the people closest to you can't see your worth.